All right. Welcome everybody to what is today? 10th, March 10th, Octant community meeting. I will get the notes pulled up and got a few things to cover today. Mostly just around kind of a recap of last week since that meeting got lost in the ether, really. Like it was recorded, but we only got one half of the audio and we didn't have a local backup. So, and I made an attempt to go narrate over the top of it, and every time I tried it, my dog would start barking at something, and so I gave up. Even with I was using the NVIDIA voice tool to like stop it from happening, and still, just like every time, it would still like come through a little bit, and it's just like I was like, all right, I give up. So uh, So yeah, so today we will focus on kind of recapping and then talk about some current open issues and where things are going. So last week we mentioned that we were officially starting the sprint and targeting March 17th. We discussed some of the CPU issues that were going on around Mac OS, some of the things that we had found, front end versus back end, where time was being spent, different strategies, ideas, thoughts. It was a good conversation between the team. Ultimately, we decided that there's a couple spots where we can save some CPU time, and that there was also just we would probably benefit from having a more formalized approach to how we want to address performance issues in the future. Essentially, what metric are we going to use to test them? How are we going to benchmark it? What data set are we going to use for that benchmark, so that everyone's kind of on the same level field when we're looking at these things on different types of systems and different architectures. And so we haven't taken any action on that yet, but I think so far everyone on the team is generally using the same remote cluster that we have up in GCP to do testing with. So we'll draft up some formal thing around like, here's how you use like local content for doing performance testing or something to that effect. Um, so expect to see that coming. The other thing is we mentioned that we had some code walkthroughs. One was produced by me, which was a walkthrough of Octant and how it generates content. A couple others were made by Sam for how to add new components in or do plugins, uh, and adding a new component with like getting everything going through Go and Storybook and the whole thing. So I think the I'm probably mixing up some of that timeline because Sam has been working on this stuff last week and this week. So I think there's probably both things are there, but yeah. So there's some videos that'll be added to the YouTube playlist around components and plugins. Um, so I'll pause there just to see if anyone wants to add something I might have missed. I know that meeting was like a 40-minute meeting, and I just summarized it in 5 minutes. So feel free to add something that you think might have been important that was missed.
Yeah, I suppose like since we're talking a lot about videos, maybe the line here to think about is what are we missing? Like I know some people like to consume information in the form of videos. That being said, uh, they aren't readily edited and they can go edited quickly, as mentioned. So maybe we should figure out if there is something that the community wants or even internally that we should have in video form. Let's start churning these out.
Yeah, that's a good call out. So yeah, any videos you'd like to see, any blog posts you'd like to see. We already know that example code is something that people have been asking for, multiple requests for the kind of like end-to-end examples of like how do I manage state that's happening outside of the plugin, since plugins are on this polling loop? Or how do I communicate with external sources of data and then bring that into my plugin? So patterns of usage that are common within plugin code is something that we've people have been expressing a desire to have for a while now. I think we're going to put some good effort into that after this current release, because this current release we're adding in a bunch of new components, and we are kind of bringing in some of the more interactive workflows that you could expect to want to do as a plugin author. Rich handling of forms, stepping through stages of a form. Sam put up a PR recently at the timeline component, which is here. Hold on, where's that? It's here. There it is. Can show that's related to this issue, but the timeline component and clarity is this one if you're not familiar with it, right? So we're adding more rich components that will have steps and stages to what they're doing, where you might want to take action on it or and respond to that event and things like that. So I think the focus for 0.18 will be to add in these new components and create a richer ecosystem around the capabilities of components, and then heavily present that with examples and documentation. I'm maybe so I brought this up in an issue or in the PR that Sam created, and we can talk about it here as well. But we had talked about this for a long time of having better examples, and I'm wondering if as part of these new components as they come in, I think we're adding 3 or 4, do we want to extend the existing sample plugin to just have an example of these new components as like the standard going forward, of like, if you're adding a new component, it gets a storybook entry, it also gets a concrete example plugin entry.
Yeah, so I've started thinking about this, and I think what we eventually want to go towards is more than one example plugin. Currently, we have just that one, and it's starting to feel a little busy. And I actually had a conversation with Vikram last week, and he was a little confused with the sample plugin because it adds additional information into a pod view, and it created a separate module. And that was confusing to him because he expected it to just be a module, and he wasn't looking at the pods for the sample plugin. So over time, as we continue to sprawl out a single plugin, it might get confusing on where to look for a specific feature. So what I'm going to do is to have that install plugin command in our go run build script. To when it runs, it'll actually look for a series of Go files in that Octant sample plugin folder, and we'll just break them apart. We will have a little menu that pops up in the terminal, and it'll be like, which plugin do you want, sample plugin do you want to install? And we'll just break this up, and I can add one for the timeline, and we can create like a dozen or so of examples.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think we have there was a thought of doing this on a kind of a broader sense, which was, we have a repository, I believe, for this exact thing. Yes, there is this very much neglected Octant example plugins repo. So I think lifting the current example plugin out and into here, and then having that build command, we could do this like as a submodule, so that the build command can check this out and build plugins from here. But I think that this is probably the place we want to start to centralize around that pattern. Let's see, I'll just add that to the notes for this one. And so plug in an example builder. Okay. All right. Anything else to recap from? It's kind of a new thing and old thing, but anything else to recap before we move on to the new items? Cool. So we were talking about performance issues last week, and we addressed a couple things that did help with those this week. One of the ones that had the biggest impact, it's not merged yet, but it will be soon. We just want to do probably maybe a little bit of restructuring, but the idea here is sound, which is we were, and Milan, if you want to speak to this, you go ahead, since you created the PR for it.
It's been a while. I'm not sure I remember, but the core of it is just that caching. Basically, we every time we try to calculate, bring back the navigation items for CRDs, every time we were collecting them, and that's pretty expensive operation. On my Mac, it would take 500 milliseconds, and it would run twice a second. So yeah, that's a lot of CPU cycles. So basically the idea that to prove that, I just created a memory cache, and it's currently it was a global memory cache. So I think Wayne made a really good point that probably shouldn't be global. We should try to figure out a better way to do that. So I think that will improve the performance, at least on the Mac, for maybe 15%. That's what the average large cluster that I've seen is happening. So it's a good performance improvement, but we still need to figure out a little better way to both test it and to structure it. I mean, ideally, I was thinking about this more, Wayne, and ideally, I kind of feel that we need to better way to handle memory caching in general, to have some kind of so if you think about it, ideally, when you, let's say you want to collect the data that needs to be presented on screen, for example, navigation, when you do collect that data, you should never hit the Kubernetes API. I think we should try to hit the data in somewhere in memory, and then there should be other part of it that fills the memory cache on maybe totally different time schedule. So, and I know we've done some work on that. So some kind of general in-memory cache would definitely help us, I feel, with performance.
Yeah, so I can look at this code, but the call to, there's a list call in here somewhere that's fetching the custom resources. It's in this custom resource definitions code somewhere. Yeah, this right here. So this list call is backed by a memory cache. So there's an informer sitting here that is supplying the results to this list call, and once that informer has synced, those are that list result is essentially sitting in memory and coming off of a cache. It is still doing so, but that cache is sitting. Where's that cache sitting? Is that sitting on? I'd have to go look. But so I think there's two things that might be happening. One, it may not be using the cache as we expect it to be doing, because it should be. The other thing is that potentially just this operation
Yeah, that's
here
it.
is expensive, right? Like casting
is.
all of this, like reflecting all of this content and marshaling and unmarshaling and then sorting that list. Like if that's the expensive part of this, right? Like once this is expensive until it is cached, until it's synced.
Mhm.
Once that is done, if this becomes the expensive part, then that is not like, that's something that just kind of needs its own cache for the function.
Yeah, unfortunately, Marshall and unmarshal is taking 2/3 of the time there.
Okay.
And we have to do it because of the issue. I think you see that line 142.
Yeah.
And I think that's been fixed. Some you probably know that you worked on this. I think that's been fixed in 120. So hopefully, if we go to 120, that will improve the performance. If you scroll all the way to the bottom, you'll see. Yeah, exactly. So yeah.
Yep. In 120.
But it's amazing that roughly 1/3 of the time in that call is spent the Marshall, and
Okay.
1/3 on Marshall's 2/3. I don't know how much time switching back to vendor convert will save us, because maybe it's doing behind the scenes exactly the same things we do here, which is sequentially calling Marshall and Marshall. So
Let's look. We can see the fix right here. So no, I mean it's adding the reflecting type into the converter so it knows how to deal with it. It was just missing from the switch statement, essentially, right? Like here's the switch statement that it's running through, string bool,
right.
ints. It just didn't have float. So that is way less expensive than having to run it through a second pass of our Marshall and unmarshal. Yeah, cool. All right. And then I made a switch that actually introduced a bug, which made me sad, because our tests, obviously we need better coverage because they were all passing when this happened. But so we switched to JSON Iter, which is a third-party package for doing JSON handling. It's faster. It avoids some of the overhead of that the built-in library has by avoiding some of the reflection. There's a pretty decent benefit to using it on Octant. We do a lot of JSON marshaling and unmarshaling, and on our content response data set on my local machine for our testing cluster in the default namespace, I was seeing on average 100 millisecond reduction in the total time of our generate call just by switching the library over. Sadly, there was some sorting that didn't get passed into this that we weren't testing for, that we were depending on for front end rendering. Like we determine whether or not we're going to re-render the front end based on if the structure of the JSON has changed, and by not having the sort being deterministic, the front end was saying, oh, this structure has changed with every single request, even though it was just like labels moving or the query parameters in the response moving. It would then re-render the whole JSON response. So we've opened an issue for that, and I know Milan and Luis had both encountered it around the same time, and I think Sam encountered it a couple days earlier and yeah, posted it up. But then when Luis and Milan did some investigation, they found that it was related to this JSON Iter change. So there was a conversation on Slack that you all might have saw Milan, did you try the sort keys thing?
Yes, I definitely confirm that fixes the
Oh, okay.
issue, but I still think it's worth exploring if we can, not sacrifice the performance. So kind of merge fastest plus the sort. I still have to play with that.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, in my testing, every single I tested 3 different modes for JSON editor. All of them were faster, and like the
Cool.
fastest config one is only like, I mean, it's a single digit percentage point faster than the compatible with standard library one, right? It's like it is all of them are faster than the built-in library. So I don't know that it's worth spending too much time trying to squeeze out, a millisecond of performance from it.
Sounds good. Yeah. I'll work on that then.
And then, so just a general update, this last week, so we announced last week, we were like, oh, it's official kickoff for the sprint. This week, after that, and early this week, we've been kind of just like in the weeds on some of these issues around like performance and rendering layouts and things like to Sam's point last week, right? These issues can have tails that go on forever. So like scoping them to a reasonable amount of time and providing reasonable conditions in which we should execute our testing scenarios under is all things that we ought to do before we really like, hey, we're gonna go and address these performance things. So they've been a bit of a distraction, a positive one in many ways, right? Like I think we've made good improvements to Octant's core, even just with kind of these surface level of like, let's do a mem stat, let's do a CPU stat, let's look at the output of those, let's find where a lot of time is being spent, and let's just reduce the amount of time in those obviously like hotspot areas. Like some quick wins. I wouldn't say it was like a wholly scientific approach, but it was definitely like we got some wins out of it. The CRD caching for the navigation was a big one. JSON editor was a little one, and I think there was another one in there along the way that I might have missed, but like overall performance is greatly improved. So with that said, that bit of distraction on performance stuff, I just went ahead and said, you know what, let's target this for March 24th. Last week, I did say 17th, maybe the 24th. This week, I'm just going to say like, we'll target this for the 24th. The fact that I think last week we had 21 issues in the backlog under to do, and this week we have 21 issues in the backlog under to do, means it's probably safe to say we need to bump it now instead of waiting until the last minute. I think one of the problems we've gotten into in the past, and this is totally my fault, is like we're like, yep, this is the date, and then like something like this happens and I don't adjust the expectation. I just leave it, and then we get to that date and it's like next week. So we'll just adjust the expectation now. We will target the 24th. And I will say this, what we have ready on the 24th is what we will release on the 24th. We will not do any of like, this is blocking for the next release. We'll cut. And if there are things that people are like, wow, I wish this really was in ODOT18, then we will do an ODOT19 a week later, even, whatever. Like, but the 24th will be I want to start having us on a kind of like a set a date, release on that date. What we have is what we have. The reason I decided to push this one a week is because, well, we spent our time doing performance stuff and other things that basically we didn't make a whole lot of progress on sprint specific things. So that's why. And then, oh yeah, I mentioned this before. So Sam has created a video. He posted it into the Octant Slack channel. I think he posted in the Octant Slack channel.
Yeah, it's posted there. They're processing on YouTube right now. Probably be another hour before they are online.
So yeah, so those videos will be online. This was the third part, which is like adding the component to Storybook, I believe. I'm trying to find it. Is that right, Sam?
Yep, that's right. So part 1 was Go, part 2 was Angular, part 3 Storybook.
Perfect. And I think with that, we're to the open Q&A. So does anyone have anything they wanted to bring up before we call it? Okay. Well, looks like that's a no. So well, thank you again, everyone, as always, and we will see you next week.